because the economy itself is really chugging along. I mean, the fundamentals of the economy are really strong.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Change in the Market, your mindful guide to the ever-changing real estate world. My name is Peyton Beck, and with me, as always, is our fearless leader, futurist, visionary, recognized real estate genius, Chris Masiello. Chris, how are you today?
Thanks, Peyton. That's quite the intro.
You're welcome, man.
Great. Yeah, good to see you. Good to be with everybody.
So, Chris, there's a lot happening right now, right? There's a lot in the news, a lot everywhere.
There is. Yeah.
Let's just dive in. What are we talking about today?
You know, there's this kind of nagging discussion about interest rates and inflation, and anybody who kind of follows economics or the economy, you see a lot about the Federal Reserve and kind of this tension between the Federal Reserve and the economy about raising interest rates to basically kind of cool off the economy and suppress inflation. So it's probably worth having a little bit of a conversation about. So typically, if you take post-World War II up to the pandemic, right? So that period of time would be considered post-World War II economic models. Economies would overheat. And then when the economy would overheat, there'd be inflation. Inflation erodes spending capability or buying power at the consumer level and at business level. And so raising rates, interest rates, increases the cost of borrowing, both for consumers and for businesses, thus slowing down the economy because we're a capital-driven economy, right? Then slowing down the economy, and then inflation would start to subside, and then we would do the whole thing all over again. And so like since the Second World War, I don't know how many cycles there have been, but there have been quite a few, and all generally following kind of the same trend. Now we find ourselves in a different period where this is the post-pandemic economy. And we have inflation. And we have inflation for all sorts of reasons that are not necessarily just isolated to the economy, the US economy. So we have inflation because we still have post-pandemic issues, supply chain, labor, all those types of issues. Then you have inflation because we've got energy disruption, really global energy disruption, specifically in Europe, and caused by the conflict in the Ukraine. And then in of itself, you have a ground war in Europe. And so if you take a look at the pandemic, well, we haven't had one of those in 100 years. Take a ground war in Europe. Well, it's been 75, 80 years, right, since we've had one of those. And those are all very deep, just in any one of them in themselves, right, are destabilizing. And so there's this kind of this tension with the Federal Reserve where they're looking at it and they're saying, well, we have a target inflation rate of 2%. And I get why they want that, because it increases buying power for people and it doesn't erode the value of the dollar. So it's not hard to understand why they take that position. But when you in the backdrop of some of the disruptions that we've had that really are kind of systemic by their nature, a 2% inflation target probably doesn't make a lot of sense. And there's a lot of sentiment now that inflation right now has gotten down from almost 9% down to 4%, and that probably inflation in the very sub 4, so like in the high 3s, low 4s range is probably about the best we're going to get. And I think that's kind of what the Federal Reserve and then relatably interest rates are struggling with. And so we kind of find ourselves now, I think at a kind of an impasse, like what's going to happen next, right? Will they raise rates? And I think at this point, there's a very growing body of sentiment that raising interest rates any further will harm the economy, and having 4% inflation, considering things like pandemics and ground wars and energy disruption, supply chain disruption, is probably acceptable, because the economy itself is really chugging along. I mean, the fundamentals of the economy are really strong.
What are those fundamentals I know that's maybe a little more simplistic, but when you say that, what does that refer to specifically?
Well, gross domestic product, GDP growth, we're still growing positively. Labor rates, although labor is expensive, labor rates are very strong. Our energy output is strong. You take a look at housing and construction. There's a lot going on in this economy that is very solid. And yes, inflation running at 9% for consecutive periods of time wouldn't be helpful. But we've got that mostly under control now. Do I want to give the Federal Reserve total credit for that? No, I think it was probably going to come under control mostly anyways, just by the natural order of things. But yeah, I think the economy really it's really pretty solid.
Okay. So a solid economy, that kind of ties into what we talk a lot about here, right? Real estate. What does that mean for all of us who are either looking to buy or have bought or are investing? What does that do for us?
Yeah, so I think as far as real estate goes, there are a couple points to this that during the pandemic, and actually I'm going to go back to the 2008 great financial crisis, right? Is that we've had basically free money up until just recently, right? Interest rates at 2-3-4%, right? And that started really during the Great Recession, and then as a way to help get us out of it, and then it worked its way, up into the pandemic, and through all that, there's been a lot of government spending with relief programs and things like that. So there is a lot of money out, at a governmental level, and so kind of pulling back on that money supply, is through raising of interest rates. There is some logic to it. And so here's how this relates to housing. Because of the programs that we've had, where there's been government intervention, through basically increasing the liquidity in the money supply, we're going to have some quantitative tightening, which means not having as much cash in the economy. And what that means is that interest rates, be unlikely that we'll see 3% interest rates anytime soon. And I would say probably not in my lifetime, whatever that is. I just don't think you're going to see it. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't go down, they won't get into the fives or maybe high fours. And so I think if people are waiting for rates to go back to 3%, you're going to be waiting a really long time. And if you're in the need of making a move, I would not use that as the barometer whether you should or shouldn't move or not. Because all the while you're waiting for interest rates to drop, housing prices are going up. In New England, they're still going up 10% a year. That's not true in other parts of the country, but nationally, housing prices are still going up. And so your actual cost to buy that house, okay, over and above interest rates is actually going up even greater. You'd be better off taking we've talked about this before, you'd be better off taking a slightly higher rate and getting in now. And that's become even, I think, more obvious today than it was when we first started talking about it at the beginning of the year, that you really don't want to be waiting. If you need a house with that extra bedroom, or if you need more space, or if you're downsizing, whatever your reason for it is, let the need guide you. Don't let the interest rates, drive your decision.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I think that kind of ties into what I believe we're wanting to kind of hit on this week from a bigger picture, right? This idea of when opportunity does arise, right? And when it becomes obvious. You want to speak to that a little bit more? Yeah,
before we get into that, just a couple statistics too, is that, interest rates today are still well below the average since 1975. And the other piece to it is that real estate as an investment, just behind stocks, 91% of the time has always appreciated in value over and above inflation. So in other words, over and above, your cost of living, real estate has actually gone up over and above your cost of living increases. And, that's pretty remarkable. And that's since 1926. That's since before the Depression, those numbers. So, real estate is a really good long-term investment, for you, if you're an investor, or for your family. and you really don't let a temporary condition like interest rates get in the way if you can avoid it. So your question about how do we use this personally, right? And I always think this sounds kind of obvious, right? But if you're waiting for a trend to go from being like a trend to being like an obvious fact, you missed it.
Yeah,
It.
I mean, that's why none of
Right.
us have. That's why I'm not a Bitcoin billionaire at this point, right?
Right. Well, what was that example you were using earlier?
I think I said Apple earlier, but yeah, that's why we all don't own Apple stock, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So there's this expression, fortune favors the bold, and that is, people who generally, move with their instincts, which are more guttural and heartfelt, tend to be make better, more successful decisions than those that are waiting until it's like so obvious. Well, by the time it's obvious, it's over. You lost there is no opportunity, right? And I kind of look at this moment in time like for real estate that way. And I think we can carry that true in our personal lives, of course, and our personal decisions that we make for ourselves and our families. And I think also, is that you dovetail that into kind of real estate, is that, interest rates have gone up. Yes, it might seem a little counterintuitive, but not really, because the cost of borrowing is fractional compared to the cost of the value of the houses that keep going up. And every year that you put off not making that move is one less year you have of appreciation under your belt. And so, what might not seem obvious now, but by the time it seems obvious, which is about the time interest rates will drop down to 5%, then you've lost this window which you could optimize. So fortune favors the bold.
Awesome. Well, that's going to do it for us today on this episode of Change and the Market. Chris, thank you so much for your excellent insights. If you're enjoying this episode and the series in general, feel free to like and subscribe, share this with colleagues or friends, and share your feedback in the comments below. We'll look at that, and we'd love to have some interaction with you. Until next time, fortune favors the bold. See you all next week.
All right. See you, folks. Take care. Thanks, Peyton.
I can't say that, Chris. That just feels so corny.